Hey there, Horse Center fans. Matt and I are back with another exciting edition of the show. We're talking Breeders' Cup, Matt.
We sure are. We're bringing back that popular show from last year where we give you pretenders and contenders.
Who do Matt and I like? Don't we like in the Breeders' Cup? Watch now. Contenders, Pretenders, right here on Horse Center. Welcome to another edition of Horse Center, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I have the excellent pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I am good, my Kentucky friend, and we are less than 3 weeks till the Breeders' Cup, Brian. How about we do our annual Contenders and Pretenders show?
Well, that sounds like an excellent idea, Matt. Let's do it. 16 days away from Breeders' Cup Friday. So let's start with a few Breeders' Cup Friday races, Matt. Now, folks, these are horses that Matt and I suggested to each other as horses that might be interesting. Get to know a little bit more about how Matt and I feel about these horses. Interesting to discuss. And the good news is, or the bad news is, depending on your point of view, Matt and I really will have some debates here on these horses. But we're going to start in the Juvenile Turf Sprint, which is listed as the first race of the Breeders' Cup menu, Matt. And you suggested Bulletproof One.
I did. I suggested Bulletproof One because this is a horse that comes from the barn of Peter Miller. And hey, we sure know how Peter Miller's runners have performed in those sprint races in the Breeders' Cup, be they on dirt, be they on turf. And in that juvenile sprint, which can be a kind of a wide open race, I noticed Bulletproof One ran a big race at Santa Anita, going this 5 furlong distance, a big closing move in a stakes race to get up for second, and it's going to be a big price.
Yeah. It's hard to say if she's going to be a long shot or not. Now, certainly a talented California-bred filly. She should have odds. I think Peter Miller, by this point, though, is going to get bet more in these races than he would have a few years ago. I will say it again, though, Matt. She's a California-bred filly, so this is a step up, and she's made step ups. You know, she won her first few races for fun. She's obviously fast. She's obviously talented. Daughter of Idiot Proof. For you, she's a contender. For me, she's a pretender, unfortunately, Matt, and this is why. I'm going to give you a couple. There's a lot of good horses that are coming out west. I don't like the California horses so much in this race. Not to mention some good Europeans that'll probably be in there, but there's a couple horses. One's a filly for Wesley Ward named Kamari. The other a colt who you saw out in New York, 4-wheel drive. Those two, a little bit like last year's Juvenile Turf Sprint, those two kind of stand out for me. Kamari from Kentucky, 4-wheel drive from New York. And for that reason alone, I have to put the Calbred filly down as a pretender.
Okay, Brian, that's fine. But I can't help but think that this one's going to have a good price. And Peter Miller's sprung some upsets before heading out west, and this is a race where fillies run against the boys more than a lot of the other Breeders' Cup races. Just one to think about, maybe a contender for the trifecta or the exacta.
Yeah, and the more I think about it and what kind of field there, she should be at least 15-1. So if Matt's long shot gets in there. And that last race was good. She had a little trouble, by the way, when she was running late, 5 furlongs at Santa Anita. So, but I'm still going with overall pretender for me. Let's move to the next race on the card, Matt. It's the Juvenile Fillies Turf. And again, you've identified a contender, I believe, in the Juvenile Fillies Turf. Why don't you tell us who that is?
I certainly have. And I think I saw somewhere, maybe it was on the Breeders' Cup page, that they've changed the name of this race to the Chad Brown Juvenile Fillies Turf Race. Is that true,
official, Matt? Is that an official name change? I'm teasing.
I say that in jest, of course, because Chad Brown has won this race 5 times already. 4 of the last 5 races in here. So I've grabbed a hold of a Chad Brown, possible Chad Brown runner in here named Selflessly, who most recently won the Miss Grillo in New York, one of the major preps for this Jupiter Philly Turf race in the East. She does need to be supplementally nominated, but I'm going to assume that's going to be happening. And morning line that I saw suggests 8-1 odds on this horse. Hey, if I can get Selflessly at that price with Chad Brown, contender.
God, I'm going to disagree with you. Now, I'm only going to disagree in the 8-1 part. I don't think she'll be 8-1. This looks like a pretty wide open race, frankly, on paper. But I'm with Matt Shipman on this one because I think the horses coming from New York look a little bit better than the horses from California and Kentucky in this race. And the horse that makes the most sense out of anybody, if I had to pick one, wide open, yes. But if I had to pick one, it would indeed be Selflessly. I can't see her at 8-1, but with as many horses there are to bet, maybe she will be 5-1 or 6-1 or something. Chad Brown, more than ready. What a wonderful sire, especially a turf sire, more than ready's been. This one's only had 2 starts. I really liked her sprint at Saratoga, where she was closing really fast, as she was nowhere in the picture early in the stretch, and she just missed running second in a 5.5 furlong sprint that day. That was her first race. Then she comes right out of that 5 furlong race, and she runs what I thought was the best 2-year-old Philly Turf race so far this year in America, the Miss Grillo. And she made an earlier move. She got the lead, and she always looked like a winner coming down the stretch against good fillies. So, yeah, contender, Selflessly. Good pick, anywhere near 8-1, and I think you're on to something there, Matt. All right, we're going to stick with Friday, and we're going to stick with Matt's suggestions here. It's the Juvenile Fillies, which is actually the next race on the card, I believe. And you're taking a poke at one of the favorites, calling this one a pretender. Is that right?
I am, Brian. I'm taking a poke at the Bob Baffert horse. I'm taking a poke at Bast. The main reason is because all of the action that the Baffert horses, especially the Baffert 2-year-olds, get in there. I wasn't real impressed with Bast's win in the Chandelier last time. Seemed like maybe she struggled a little bit with the 2 turns, struggled a little bit to get the win by a neck in there. So morning line that I saw said 7-2, but I don't think so. Baffert in California, probably going to be shorter than that, and I'm going to try and beat that horse.
Yeah, this is a tough race. The Juvenile Fillies, much like the Juvenile Fillies Turf, as I said, I think it's a wide open race. Matt's taking a shot against a favorite here. I think deep down you realize that she could win. Her Del Mar debutante was really, really good. And then she, as Matt said, she struggled, but she was the best. She got there and she won by a neck in the Chandelier in her first time around 2 turns. It makes sense coming off such a big debutante and the first time around 2 turns that she might be a little bit better this time. Daughters of Uncle Mo or sons of Uncle Mo usually don't have too much trouble getting a mile at 16th. Now, the thing about Bast, like Matt was alluding to a little bit, if she is the favorite, I'm not 100% sure. I think she'll be the favorite, but I don't think she'll be a big favorite by any means. There's just a lot of horses in here that look like they can win, including the horse they fought her tooth and nail last time, Comical. But the horses coming from Kentucky and New York look so good. British Idiom, 2 for 2, came out to Kentucky, and she really aired in the Alcibiades. Big win there, and maybe even more impressive than that was what Wicked Whisper has done in New York. Saratoga made special weight, and then the Frizette winner just looks really fast and really good. Throw in Perfect Alibi, second to British Idiom in Kentucky, but several wins at stakes wins already. Who knows how good Donna Veloci is? I think she'll get a lot of money. And Lazy Daisy even came to Kentucky and won a stakes race. So there's just a number of ones in here. So with that said, I do fear Bass could still win this race, but I don't like her best. And as the probable favorite, I'm going to go Pretender. Matt, I'm going to join you on this one.
Yes, that. We're not talking about when we say Pretender here that this is a bad horse. We're talking about a horse that we want to take a play against.
There you go. Play against Bass in the juvenile filly. So we're both on Pretenders. So Friday, we agree on the last two. We disagree on the first one. Let's jump right into Saturday, Matt. First race that we're talking about is the Filly and Mare Sprint, which is shaping up as a very interesting race. And I want to start with one of mine. Right now, she's listed in both the Filly and Mare Sprint and the Distaff, but I think the Filly and Mare Sprint is where they'll go with Guarana. Chad Brown, really nice 3-year-old. I think she's a contender in the 7-furlong Filly and Mare Sprint.
I'm going to have to agree with you, giving that Chad Brown runner a contender label. Remember, she went into the Cotillion most recently and finished second in there, and just, she didn't have a good setup in that race, and things didn't really go her way, but still finished second, having won her other races, and now cuts back in distance. And remember, folks, I know we've reminded you before, but the Filly and Mare Sprint in the Breeders' Cup is 7 furlongs, and that seems like that might be an ideal distance for this Chad Brown runner, and it's a field that looks to have a lot of speed in there and could set things up really well for Guarana.
Yeah, you said it perfectly, Matt. I loved what she did going one turn in her first 2 races. Obviously, huge win at Keeneland sprinting, and then the 1-turn Acorn was just an eye-opener. 2 turns, she didn't look quite as good. The Coaching Club American Oaks, she won. And then the Cotillion, yeah, she was chasing. She was probably too close to that fast pace, which really set the table for Street Band. But Guarana was the only one really giving her any sort of tussle in the stretch there. I think it's a perfect cutback. Brown has another 3-year-old filly to go the 9 furlongs in the Distaff, so I expect Guarana to cut back here. I guess she's the third choice in here behind a couple of streaking sprinters. So as the third choice, she's not only a contender for me, but she's going to be my top pick in the Filly and Mare Sprint. Although you have another contender you want to talk about in the same race.
Yeah, I also want to talk about Come Dancing, who has been absolutely brilliant this year, especially has done some really good running at the 7 furlong distance, winning the Gallant Bloom this year, winning the Ballerina this year, and has become a horse that has learned to come from off the pace. Earlier in her career, she was a speedball out front, but now can come off the pace. And I think that's ideal, as we mentioned with Guarana, for this field.
Yeah, we're now on a roll of green here, Matt, because I think Come Dancing is the horse that Guarana has to beat in the Filly and Mare Sprint. Listen, she's only had 1 loss this year. That came to Midnight Basoo. She looks like 7 furlongs is probably her very best distance. Matt said it perfectly. There is going to be speed in here for sure. 7 furlongs is tough for speed sprinters to last, and Come Dancing can rally a little bit. She's awfully good. Now, she's never been to California like Guarana, but she's done it on fast tracks. She's done it on sloppy tracks. She's done it on different New York tracks. Good chance that she'll be okay at Santa Anita. 7 furlongs, right up her alley. And I guess, Matt, what we're saying is Kofefi's probably the favorite in this race off her recent form, and Matt and I are going to beat her with either Guarana for me, Come Dancing for Matt, and those might be our second picks the opposite way as well. So the Filly and Mare Sprint's looking like a fun race. So we're both saying contender on Come Dancing. How about the Turf Sprint, Matt? This could be the toughest race of the whole smorgasbord of Breeders' Cup races to handicap. I just think there's a ton of horses that can win this. I respect some of the favorites, horses that'll be the favorite, but I think there's several long shots that could run. We got the 2-time defending champion for trainer Peter Miller, Stormy Liberal, on his home course, Santa Anita. Is he a contender or pretender?
Stormy Liberal, the 2-time winning Breeders' Cup turf sprint runner. he just doesn't seem to be the same horse that he's been the last couple of years. 7 years old now, Brian. Sometimes at that age, they're entitled to lose a step. 6 starts this year, no wins, and really hasn't been much of a contender in any of those races. I liked him a lot a couple races ago. Bet him in that race, and he just didn't have that good old Stormy Liberal punch anymore.
Yeah, hey, Stormy Liberal, Peter Miller, he's a threat. He's won this race 2 years in a row. Let's give him some respect. But having said that, Peter Miller, 2-time winner, I think he gets some play in here. I don't think he's a long shot by any means. I think he's one of the horses people are talking about. By the way, his last race was probably his best race recently. But I just don't see it for all the reasons you talked about, Matt. There's too many good, fast horses in here, and he is just not quite the same horse that he's been in years past. Respect him as a 2-time winner, but not this year. I'm saying pretender as well for Stormy Liberal. Not going to get his 3rd consecutive Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. Matt, let's go to the Dirt Mile because I want to talk about one of my favorite horses of the Breeders' Cup this year. I was thrilled to see Mr. Money pointing for the Dirt Mile. He's a son of Golden Sense, and you'll remember Golden Sense won the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile out at Santa Anita. In fact, he won 2 in a row. Mr. Money, I think, was born for this 2-turn, 1-mile race. I've talked about it before. I don't think he got anywhere near the trip he wanted in the Pennsylvania Derby to see his losing streak broken. For me, Mr. Money is a big-time contender in the Dirt Mile.
I'm going to go contender also, Brian. You know, I've always been a big fan of the Dirt Mile and the concept of the Dirt Mile. And it seems like sometimes connections look at it as as a stepchild, and everybody should go in the Classic. Well, I think they're making a great choice here. I think they're being realistic. I think they're picking out the right spot for Mr. Money. And I was there at the Pennsylvania Derby that day, and we both liked Mr. Money in the race, and he did not get a good trip in there. And I think the Dirt Mile is a perfect spot for the Brett Calhoun trainee.
Right, and Mr. Money should have some odds now coming off of that Pennsylvania Derby loss where he was just stuck on the lead, and then he was wrangled back for much of the race, and he was down on the inside, and finally he got caught and beaten a neck. Second by a neck in a Grade 1 doesn't sound bad, but it wasn't the real Mr. Money. I think stalking with a faster pace, 1 mile out at Santa Anita is going to be right up his alley. I think he's going to carry on the legacy of his sire, Golden Sense. I think Mr. Money is going to win this Dirt Mile, Matt. Having said that, we're not sure who's going to be in there. Omaha Beach, it looks like, is now probably headed to the sprint. Catalina Cruiser, we would guess Dirt Mile bound, but he could be headed to the sprint as well. And then you got Matoli, who could go either in the Dirt Mile or sprint. 3 key horses there. But part of that is going to be what Mr. Money's odds are. Part of it's going to be who he has to beat, but I think Mr. Money runs big no matter who's in the race. All right, Matt, speaking of fast horses, let's gear it down to 6 furlongs for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And you had an interesting pretender on your list because he's one of the best sprinters in the country, and he may be headed to the sprint this year as the favorite, depending, of course, who goes in the race.
Yeah, certainly the sprint is a race that is up in the air in terms of the composition of the field. It could turn out to be one of the best fields on the entire card if all of the headliners go in there. And if they all go elsewhere, which I doubt very much, it could come up a little light. Hey, I'm a big fan of Imperial Hint. I've gotten to see him run in New York several times in the last 2 years, but I'm calling him a pretender because a lot of his wins, Brian Zipsy, have come against small fields, and he, fields of 5 or 6 in those races in New York, and he's going to have to face a lot of very, very talented horses in the Breeders' Cup. Last year, he was kind of a flop in the Breeders' Cup. Again, like we said earlier in the show, yeah, he's a horse that could win the race, but As you said, Brian, as a potential favorite in there, I'm going to have to pass.
All right, so he's a pretender on your list. He's a contender on my list, Matt. I'm going to take back what I said. I don't think he's the favorite in here with Omaha Beach in. Certainly, if Mitoli's in, I have a feeling that he won't be the second choice even. So I think Imperial Hint is playable. Will be playable odds, at least in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Listen, he's been in the Breeders' Cup Sprint the last 2 years. Last year, you're right. I wouldn't call it a flop, but it was a little disappointing. He was third in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and he really didn't look like a winner that day behind Roy H. 2 years ago, though, I want to remind you about 2 years ago, because I don't think he's lost a step. And 2 years ago was his only trip out to Southern California, and he ran a really good race in the Breeders' Cup Sprint 2 years ago. He's one of those horses who's got the speed to stay close, but he doesn't battle on the lead. And then he makes that quick pound. He's a true 6 furlong horse. I like him a little bit better than Chance-A-Lot, and I think he's would give Omaha Beach everything he wants. If Omaha Beach can beat Imperial Hint at 6 furlongs, wow, that's impressive. But I can't put Imperial Hint as anything but a contender in here. Second and third the last 2 years, coming off 2 nice wins, including a game win last time in the Vosburg. Don't think he's lost a step. I have to have him as a contender. Now, in the distaff, we might go another direction, because I think you like a certain 3-year-old filly that we've both liked over the months this year in the distaff.
Yeah, I'm still on the Street Band bandwagon in there, and I'm staying with Street Band. As I said before, I'm going to look at Street Band as a contender possibly to win and pick up the pieces in the race, if, of course, Midnight Pursue is not at her best. But I also look at Street Band as a definite contender to get a piece of the trifecta in there. I feel like Street Band is the kind of horse that's going to like that new surface out at Santa Anita.
Yeah, the new surface might be a better thing for her than surfaces of Santa Anita past. Still, I can't get on Street Band in this race. I like the story. I like Larry Jones. I like Sophie Doyle. And again, I liked her. She was my pick at 7-1 in the cotillion. But I think that race was just the perfect confluence of everything setting up so well for her. Very fast pace. And she was well back early. And she really took advantage of the blistering early fractions. And she came rolling down the stretch like she should have. Now we have Midnight Pursue. Midnight Pursue is the horse to beat. Midnight Pursue is a heavy favorite. If Elate is in there, I think she's going to be in the Classic. But if she's in there, Elate deserves to be the second choice. And I would like Elate better than Street Band. Probably not in there, but I'm going to give you some other names that I think can beat Street Band this time. Dunbar Road. Don't forget, Dunbar Road was certainly better than her in the Alabama 2 starts back. And I didn't like the trip she got in the Spinster so much. And Serengeti Empress, there's going to be finally a little less speed for Serengeti Empress. If Serengeti Empress gets out there, maybe she's tough to catch as a longer shot than Street Band. If there's no Elate, Matt, I could see Street Band as the second choice. Granted, it's going to be a 7-1 second choice, but I don't know who they bet after Midnight Pursue if Elate's not in there. You know, you got decent older fillies, Blue Prize, she's a Julie. I can't get on Street Band this time. I like her. I want to root for her, but I don't think the odds will be good, and I just don't see her getting it done in the distaff. She's a pretender for me. Sorry, sir.
That's okay, Brian.
All right. Yeah, the more horses, if we like long shots, and the more horses, the more people that disagree with us, the better for our long shots. So we'll move on to the Classic now, Matt. We got a bunch of horse lists. It is the Classic after all. And you have an interesting pretender that I want to start out with, because I think he's still the favorite, Matt. Who's that?
And you said it right there, Brian. And I agree with what you said. I think he's still the favorite, and that, of course, is McKinsey. Has been the favorite for the Breeders' Cup Classic every single day of 2019. Bob Baffert, Santa Anita, everything points to that. his record 13 wins, 13 starts, 7 wins, 5 seconds. But Brian, his second place finish in the Awesome Again upon his return to Santa Anita, in my eyes, was very disappointing. He was not a contender heading towards the wire in that race. McKenzie is a horse that does his best running with a lot of time between starts, and he's not getting this here. The question of the 10 furlongs remains. I want no part of McKenzie as the favorite.
Yeah. And I can understand everything you're saying. However, I cannot put him on the contest. I was with you with Bast in the juvenile fillies because I really don't think Bast will win. McKenzie, though, I think has a shot to win. You mentioned Bafford's record in the race. There's a reason for that. I don't think he was geared up for the Awesome Again. We saw how good the Whitney was the start before that. And frankly, the Awesome Again was a horse getting out on the lead and running big, and no one could catch him. McKenzie was the only one that got remotely close to him. So it was a second place finish. That changes his odds in the Classic from 9-5, 2-1 to 7-2, 4-1 now maybe. So I don't think the odds are bad. People will question the 1.25 miles with McKenzie, and that's a question as well. So lots of question marks. But in my head, I think he's still one of the horses to beat in this race. I think he's a classy horse. He runs first or second pretty much every single time other than this race last year. I think this is a much better setup for him this year than last year. So for that reason, I have him as a contender. Now, the next one on the list is my long shot female, Elate. And I am saying long shot because with all the different horses to bet, I think Elate is going to be ignored. If she had won the Spinster by a length or two, I don't think she would have been ignored. I think she would have been up there with the favorites. But losing to females last time in the Spinster is going to totally change the dynamic of Elate's odds in the Breeders' Cup Classic. I think she's 10-1. I think she's 12-1 now in the Classic. And I think the Spinster is a draw line through a race for me. She ran into a horse, Blue Prize, who I think really just likes Keeneland and ran a big race. Elate, if you look at it, she was kind of pushed and shoved outside on the first turn. She had to deal with Dunbar Road coming up to her early in the stretch. It wasn't a bad race. It wasn't a great race. But on the other hand, she was coming out of a battle, a real tooth and nail struggle with Midnight Bassoon, the race before at Saratoga. Elate's a 1.25 mile horse. She's got kind of that grinding style where there's not such a great field of horses. The grinding style often does well. I just think she hits the board in here, whether it's first, second, or third. 1.25 mile horse, give me her now as a long shot. She's a contender for me.
Yeah, Brian, I agree with a lot of the things you said. The way you described it, I think you were making a case for Elate clearly, but a lot of the things you said to me are things that we've been hearing about Elate a lot in the last 2 years. It's always something. It's always something in these big races, and I just don't see Elate as a contender to win this race. I see Elate as a pretender, although you cannot fight the logic of Bill Mott here. We know that Elate can get the 10 furlong distance. This is a really shaky Breeders' Cup Classic field. So why not take the shot in that race for the $6 million purse, a second or a third in there with that kind of purse is a really good day, as opposed to facing that formidable, maybe a more formidable field in the distaff. In my mind, I would need all of 10-1 or 12-1 to use Elate. And hey, I agree that she might be attractive on the bottom of trifectas at that price, but not on top for me.
Okay, yeah, I kind of, as a bettor, I kind of like that she lost last time because I didn't think it was a bad performance. I think it's one that she can move forward, and she loves 10 furlongs. So yeah, I like her, and I think she could win. All right, the next horse on the list, Matt, is your suggestion. It's a horse that I've always liked. His name is Vino Rosso.
Oh, Brian, didn't I say a few shows ago, no more Vino Rosso for me, Brian. I think I did that before the Santa Anita Gold Cup, when Vino Rosso went out west in that 1.25 mile race and ran such an impressive winning race on that new Santa Anita racing surface. So all of a sudden, when you throw in his really strong performance in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, where he finished first in that race and was disqualified, now all of a sudden, to me, again, with the really shaky Breeders' Cup Classic field, we know that Vino Rosso is not one of those horses we have to worry about coming from the east and liking that racing surface. So here I am again with our old friend Vino Rosso, and I'm saying contender.
Yeah, and I'm with you. He's a contender. Listen, Vino Rosso has, you hit it on the head. He has experience at Santa Anita at 10 furlongs. I think that's big. And Vino Rosso clearly likes 1.25 miles. He wasn't as good as McKinzie. We're disagreeing on McKinzie's viability here. McKinzie was much better than Vino Rosso at 9 furlongs at Saratoga. But that was sandwiched by 2 really good 1.25 mile races for Vino Rosso. He's done it before at Santa Anita. If I had to pick one horse to win this race, it would actually be Vino Rosso. I think that things are setting up well for him. I think he's a better horse now that they've realized that they got to push him a little bit early and be a part of the race early. He looks like the third choice to me in here behind McKinzie and Code of Honor. Maybe you get 5-1 on Vino Rosso in here again. I bet him in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. He will be on my tickets for sure in the Breeders' Cup Classic. There's a couple others I want to mention just because they're interesting horses and they've got a lot of ink lately. Math Wizard. Math Wizard rolled right on by. He looked great, Matt, in the last 100 yards of that Pennsylvania Derby. Rolled right on by my horse, Mr. Money, to become a Grade 1 winner after trying many graded stakes in a row. And that late rally, that explosive move late in the Pennsylvania Derby is going to have people betting Math Wizard in the 1.25 mile Breeders' Cup Classic at Santa Anita. I say that's fool's gold, folks. Even at 25-1, don't use Math Wizard in the Breeders' Cup Classic. That Penn Derby, he's just not the horse that Mr. Money is, or Code of Honor is, or most of these older horses are. Math Wizard, total pretender for me.
Feel good story, the Pennsylvania Derby. Trainer Safi Joseph is charismatic, a young trainer, the kind of person that is a really good guy to have in racing in terms of attracting fans and such. But hey, this will be his first time against older horses, and in the Pennsylvania Derby, everything went his way in there. I enjoyed being there. I enjoyed that victory. But for me, Math Wizard is a pretender. I don't think I even want to use him in the trifecta.
Yeah, no, I don't see him hitting the board in here. If I'm wrong, it'll add up well for those who play him and win money with him for the Math Wizard. But yeah, and people will argue with us because the fractions in the Penn Derby were not fast, but he was the only rallier in the race, and horses were being restrained early. So that's why it's set up for him in the Penn Derby. That's why he did what he did in the Penn Derby. Whole different game out here. Throw Math Wizard right out. Pretender. And Matt, finally, one of the biggest names, I think, in 2019 has just been a mystery horse this year. He returned in Monday's Knickerbocker, and he ran an even race to kind of just be in the picture slightly fourth. I'm talking about, of course, Catholic Boy, the winner of last year's Travers and Belmont Derby, back-to-back Grade 1 wins at 10 furlongs. His trainer Jonathan Thomas still seems a little bit giddy about running him in the Breeders' Cup Classic. The Knickerbocker was merely a prep. I say contender, though. Hey,
to me, Catholic Boy is the head scratcher, the big name head scratcher horse of the year. His recent performances have just been, in my eyes, lackluster. And I'll be honest with you, Brian, I expected the announcement from Jonathan Thomas after that Knickerbocker to be that Catholic Boy had been retired. And to my surprise, hearing that he is still under consideration for the Breeders' Cup, whether it's the Classic or the Dirt Mile. To me, Catholic Boy just does not seem to be the same horse. I give him a pretender rating.
Yeah, pretender rating. Here's why people will like Catholic Boy a little bit. Back class, proven at 1.25 miles, needed a prep race, ran okay in the prep race. If he moves forward, who knows? In fact, his recent form reminds me just a little bit of Valponi, a big long shot winner of the Breeders' Classic you'll remember years ago, Matt. The difference is Catholic Boy just hasn't looked like the same horse this year. I mean, I guess it's possible. I would much prefer him to Math Wizard as a potential winner of the Breeders' Cup Classic, but I just can't get on the bandwagon of Catholic Boy in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Matt, I think that was 14 horses we went through real quick. What do you think of the Omaha Beach likely decision that they're going to the Breeders' Cup Sprint?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. The more stuff that I read seems to point Omaha Beach to the Sprint. I had said to myself that if Omaha Beach does go to the Sprint, then that's certainly a signal that he is going to be racing more in the year. And with a goal of a few months later, the Pegasus World Cup. I figured that if we heard that he was going to go in a longer race in the Classic or the Dirt Mile, that maybe that would be his last race of the year. So, hey, the way he ran in the Santa Anita Sprint Championship with the talent we know Omaha Beach has, I make him a contender in that sprint race, Brian, and it sure makes that race intriguing.
Yeah, and I'll take what you said earlier in the show a step farther. The Breeders' Cup Sprint could be the best race on this Breeders' Cup card. If we're talking Imperial Hint and Chancelot and Omaha Beach, maybe Catalina Cruiser, Matoli, could be just a bang-up race in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. It almost feels to me like they're pointing towards the Pegasus World Cup. How are they going to get them best to the Pegasus World Cup? Breeders' Cup Sprint, Malibu in late December at 7 furlongs, also at Santa Anita, and then the 9 furlong Pegasus World Cup at Gulfstream the end of January. So it's nice that we know that there's these races kind of planned out for him. Like I said, tough spot in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, but I'm glad that at the very least we'll see a great talent like Omaha Beach at the Breeders' Cup. We also heard that Enable will be coming back, not for the Breeders' Cup turf this year, but will be coming back for a 2020 campaign over in Europe, Matt.
Yeah, that's great news.
Great news. Hey, this is our Contender Pretender show, Breeders' Cup. Just a lot of fun. Again, getting into ideas, some of the horses Matt and I like and don't like. Hopefully it'll help your tickets down the road in a couple of weeks. Matt, can I get a parting shot from you, sir?
Hey, the Horse Center Breeders' Cup coverage is on a roll. Next week, we will be back on Thursday because we will await the pre-entries, which are due in next Wednesday. So we'll see you to talk more specifically about how the fields are developing. And, of course, I want to thank our producer, Brett Workman, for putting together the show.
The Iron Man, Brett Workman. Thank you to him. Thank you, folks, for watching each and every week. Matt and I are excited about the Breeders' Cup coming up in a few weeks at Santa Anita, and we know you are too. Thank you to our sponsor, the best contest site out there. That's Derby Wars. And, folks, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel here at Horse Racing Nation, please do so now. Breeders' Cup for a few more weeks. Matt and I will have 3 shows in the next 2 weeks. We'll have 2 shows on Breeders' Cup week itself. Matt and I want to hit some tickets, some big tickets at the Breeders' Cup and help you do the same. Have a great week, folks. We'll see you next week right here on Horse Center.